Hello listeners, I hope you're having a great day today. Before we begin today's story, please show some love by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Now that's out of the way, let us begin. All of Brad Carson's friends thought he lived a charmed life. His business was profitable, and his employees considered themselves fortunate to work with him. His absolutely gorgeous wife was intelligent, happy, well-liked in the community and devoted to her husband. They were proud of their 3 children, 2 of whom had already graduated from university. Everyone was healthy and woke up every morning looking forward to the day. Brad's main love was his wife Molly. She was a tall dark-haired beauty with a smile that put the sun to shame. But it was when the sun went down and lights were dimmed that Brad really got to experience the beauty of Molly. Even though her driver's license stated she was 50 years old, her body said no thanks to aging. Despite having 3 children, her breasts, with a silicone boost, were spectacular. Both to see, hold and kiss. They had met at a hospital charity event, raising money for a new children's wing. Brad was escorting his mother to the event, as his father had an unexpected trip to meet an out-of-town customer. His father, Carl, had started a small machine shop after getting out of the army after the Korean War. Brad wanted to be an engineer like his father, so his education included a degree in mechanical engineering at University of Florida, not far from his home in Tampa. Brad wouldn't have attended, but his mother really wanted to go, but didn't want to be anyone's third wheel. They were seated at a table of 8, halfway back from the band. At the same table were Molly and her date. She was a nurse at Mercy Hospital and he was a medical supply salesman. For several years she had wanted to wear an evening gown, drink champagne and attend the Salute Gala. All the doctors and wealthy business people were there. It was where she wanted to be, with the beautiful people. By accepting the salesman's offer, she was able to be at this exclusive event. The salesman had thought he was going to be the lottery winner that night, by having a stunning woman for a date with the added bonus of a free open bar. Molly wasn't interested in being caught by him while dancing, so his focus moved to the bar. As her date slobbered into his 4th or was it 5th scotch, Molly looked across the table and silently mouthed, "Please dance with me," to Brad. Brad's mother also saw Molly's plight, elbowed his ribs and gave him a wink, as if to say, "Go for it." Brad was up on his feet in a second, holding his hand out for Molly. "Brad, I'm so grateful for you rescuing me. I knew I shouldn't have gone out with him, but I have dreamed about coming to this event. This is every girl's dream, to dance the night away with a charming man at such an event. Hopefully, you don't mind dancing with me." With a smile, Brad replied, "I'm glad to help you make your night memorable. Hopefully, I'll fill the role of Prince Charming for you this evening. If you have a nice time tonight, would you be willing to go on a date with me this Saturday night?" She raised an eyebrow and said, "I don't have a date scheduled right now, but I'd be available if the right guy asks me to a nice dinner and maybe some dancing. I may not be the right guy, but I'd really like to take you to dinner and dancing." They had several fast and slow dances together, then thought they might go back to the table and have a drink. The drunken salesman had mumbled something about going to the bathroom, but he never came back. Brad's mother said, "I think he's gone for the evening. Some of my neighbors are here and ready to go home, so I'll hitch a ride home. Brad, I presume you will take this pretty nurse home on time." With a big smile he said, "Yes, mother." Then he winked at Molly and she laughed once again. Molly took him over to a table of her fellow nurses for the rest of the evening. The girls got a big kick out of Molly exchanging her dud of a date for a handsome local businessman. That was the start of their relationship, progressing from the proper stages of kissing, petting, then making love on Saturday nights. Brad couldn't believe his good fortune. Not only was she fun to be with and intelligent, but she had everything he wanted in a mate. Just like a Ferrari, the body was spectacular, and the performance of that body was world-class. While not a V-card holder, she was no slut and hadn't been passed around to the players around town. Eventually, it was time to meet the parents. Molly had already met Brad's mother. His dad took one look at her, and he had sparkles in his eyes as she gave him a hug. 2 years after graduation and 1 year of courting Molly, the two married in Molly's hometown of Fort Lauderdale. 2 years later they added a son, Jonathan, followed by a daughter, Carrie, and finally a second son, Matthew. 30-some years after Brad's graduation, Carl was ready to retire. Brad had earned the title as president of Southeast Manufacturing, a company that did specialty manufacturing for the aerospace industry. At his dad's retirement, Brad was given all the stock of the company in exchange for his father being paid a comfortable monthly consultant's fee until the end of his and his wife's lives. Jonathan, with his mechanical engineering degree, now had an upwardly mobile pathway to being the next president, 3rd generation, of the family business in 20 to 30 years. Molly worked at the hospital until she had 2 kids at home. She waited until the youngest, Matthew, was able to find his way home from school before returning to her nursing career. When the first 2 kids were in college and only Matthew at home, she decided that she didn't like the hours the hospital needed from her. She retired but didn't lose interest in nursing or the hospital. With Brad's status in the business community and generous gifts to the hospital, Molly was asked to serve on a number of hospital committees. She loved being around the hospital and the longtime friends she had that still worked there. There it was, the American dream. A wife that he enjoyed being with every waking moment, 3 great kids, a dream home for his wife, financially successful and all family members in good health. That is until Brad and Molly went over to play bridge with their neighbors, Ken and Brenda. Brenda and Molly worked the same nursing shifts when they were new hospital employees, and had remained friends. Ken was a general practice doctor, allowing Brenda to retire about the same time as Molly. Brad was having good luck with cards, but didn't register the growing pain in his chest until he had lost 4 hands. Suddenly, he was confused as to which card to play. He thought that the stress of the office had caught up to him. As he reached for the drink in front of him, he felt the growing pain in his chest. He opened his mouth to say something to Ken, but no words came out. Ken was quick to notice the problem and went to lend Brad a hand. Hands were now touching him and asking questions. He heard Brenda shout heart attack at 1948 Pine Pole Lane into her cell phone. Need ambulance now. Brad looked around and thought, he's having a heart attack, it's just the 4 of us. Somebody is in deep doo-doo and I hope for their sake the ambulance is here soon. He looked up from the floor and saw the 3 others kneeling around him, just as he felt an even greater weight on his chest. Aw shit. It's me. Molly, where are you? I'm here dear, just be calm, an ambulance is on the way. Ken has called the best cardiologist in town to meet us. For the next week, things were fuzzy for Brad. He knew where he was and why he was there. One thing that was always there was Molly. She checked every time someone wrote on his chart and surprisingly understood what was written. She was the perfect patient's advocate. The final medical result was that Brad had experienced a massive heart attack. If not for the 3 medical experts he was playing cards with that night, they would be lowering him into his eternal resting point. Quick action, plus the triple bypass surgery brought him the promise of a long and healthy life, provided he changed his lifestyle. Molly became the captain of the slave ship that was Brad's new lifestyle. Plenty of rest, no emotional stress, start slowly walking through the neighborhood, and no strenuous physical exertion. His nurse wife held his hand as she explained the final item on Brad's thou shalt not list for a full recovery. Honey, we both have to change our sex life for a few months. I'll miss the energy and physicality you have making my kitty go wild. We'll have to be very gentle with our affections. But just for a few months. You're strong and will be hammering me into the mattress before you know it. Until then we will limit ourselves to gentle and loving caresses. I love you deeply and will be at your side as we push through this challenge. Lovemaking will be especially wonderful when I get my main man back between my legs. Brad knew what the rules were going to be. He had friends and business associates that had had the same diagnosis. He didn't like it, but his alternative was to give up sex forever in a single box deep in the ground. It was an easy choice to make. For the first 4 months Brad was the ideal patient. No gripping, no whining, and no breaking any of the rules. Molly was a positive force in recreating the healthy, happy Brad. One thing that was on his mind was, how's Molly handling her celibacy? She had always had a vibe as her assistant husband for times when he was traveling. They even played with it together when the mood struck them. From their courtship until their 30th anniversary, they had been vigorous and very physical lovers. It wasn't uncommon for both of them to be drenched in sweat from the heat they generated. Brad thought it was one of his blessings. A beautiful, insatiable wife. He was happy to take on the task of keeping her kitty busy several nights a week. How was she handling his current physical disability? Molly was becoming wary of what she thought was slow physical progress, even though it was beating the doctor's expected recovery timeline. During the day she was bright and happy around Brad. Even though there was no sex, their tender caring for each other continued. Molly tried to gauge how much she could do by Brad's blood pressure and heart rate. He had been able to start slowly walking, eventually reaching a mile every day. The goal was to have his heart muscles to work a little more each week. That qualified him to attempt light sexual activity, according to his cardiologist. At the start of Brad's 4th month since his attack, he had recovered well enough to start to enjoy some of life's sexual activities. In slow steps, they gradually increased their activity, with Molly monitoring his blood pressure and heart rate as she worked her gentle fingers around and over his clock. He had made such good progress that Molly would also cradle and caress his balls. They both agreed that if she were to suck his dick, his blood pressure would exceed the danger level. Before he finished, his heart would blow up. While this was adding to Brad's recovery, neither of them truly enjoyed the lack of spontaneity and intimacy, with all the wires and monitors hooked onto him. Brad nicknamed the process Frankenstein ducking. As she would turn off the monitor, she would turn to him and lovingly say, "Someday babe, someday soon." With Brad's improvement, she was able to leave him alone to run errands and resume the social activities that she enjoyed. After a good night's sleep one morning Brad heard the phone ring, and Molly answered with "Hello Carrie." That perked Brad up as he enjoyed talking to his lively, exuberant, free-spirited daughter. He shuffled down the hall and came up behind Molly as she was talking. He heard Molly say, "Oh yes, your dad is improving every day, at least that is what the doctors say because they see him weekly. Me, I don't see it so much, but he is much better than when we took him home." There was some silence in the room until Molly began again. "Yes, my therapist is working out very well. I'm very satisfied with the results. Of course, he is nowhere near the lover that your father is. Or was and maybe soon will be. No one has rocked my world like your father did. For that reason, I told Eric that this was temporary, and I'll no longer need his services when Brad is back to full strength." Muted sounds from the phone, and then yeah, I know he will not be able to do me as good as he once did, but that will take some time to build up his stamina. So yes, I'll probably have Eric do some on-call work instead of my normal 2 times a week. Yes, dear, twice a week. That's still less than what I'm used to. No dear. Absolutely no. Never, never, never do this to your husband as long as he is able to get the job done. I'll drop Eric like a hot potato as soon as Brad's able to do me to my satisfaction. At this point Brad couldn't stand in the hallway, he had to sit down before he fell. The love of his life was ducking another man. How could she? Am I that expendable? His head was spinning, almost as bad as when he had his heart attack. He desperately started a breathing exercise the doctor told him to do when stressed. Talk about stress. Molly heard Brad stumble to the chair and drop the phone as she rushed as fast as possible to a pale-faced Brad. She held him up so he wouldn't fall to the floor. He was deliberately breathing large, smooth, regular exchanges of oxygen. He would take a big breath in and stare at Molly, saying cheater as he breathed out. Breath in, breath out, cheater. Breath in, breath out, cheater. In a panic she cut off the phone line with Carrie and dialed 911 for an ambulance. The EMTs bundled him up into the truck as they put him on oxygen. Molly tried to get into the back of the ambulance, but from his violent reaction to this, the EMTs told her to drive herself to the hospital. The same thing happened at the hospital. Molly was not allowed in the room. It was several hours later before Brad's doctor came out to see Molly. A Molly that almost chewed her entire fingernails off, blaming herself for causing another heart attack. Molly, the doctor said, he's stable now. It wasn't a heart attack that was the cause of this reaction. It was an emotional stress event of some kind. In his weakened state, the strain was just too much and he shut down. Whatever it was, it has to do with you. He absolutely does not want you in his room this afternoon. We'll see how he is tomorrow. I fully expect him to be released tomorrow. Please go home and get some rest before you become my next patient. She had a sad puppy look on her face as she shuffled back to her car. What caused this reaction? Then it came to her. He must have heard her conversation with Carrie about her having replacement sex with Eric. She had hoped that her trysts with her therapist would remain a secret. After all, their sex was just between the two of them. No one else was involved, other than Carrie, of course. It was nobody else's business what she did with her kitty, since she wasn't getting as much action as she needed. No wonder he collapsed. She realized that her husband had trusted her completely. He had never questioned her in a way to suggest he was thinking she was lying or cheating on him. He was unprepared to hear the conversation with Carrie about her lover Eric. Prior to her leaving for a month in Europe several years ago, he teased her about her missing her husband's loving. She just laughed it off by saying, "Start your cardio workout before I leave as I will ride you for days on end when I return." Thankfully, on her return, she didn't have to lie to him about the Italian men she had ducked that month. She didn't lie, but he never asked either. That was also the plan during his disability. The next morning his buddy Dr. Ken came in to check on Brad. Ken has spoken to the ear doctor and felt he needed to be there for Brad. "Hey Brad, you gave us a scare yesterday. I'm glad your heart wasn't the primary culprit, but the stress you were experiencing could lead to another heart event. Would you like me to prescribe you some depressants to calm you down and not be so excited?" "Nah Ken. It wasn't the event that bothered me so much as the bombshell coming out of nowhere. Now that I have an idea of what my, up to now undisclosed, problem is, I think I can handle it. I do appreciate your thoughts though, and I still may need to consult with you later." "Okay. Sure thing Brad. No problem. I'm heading back to my office. Would you like a ride home? Or do you have Molly coming by?" He said no, Molly will not be coming to take me to my house. It was said with more venom than what Ken expected. His doctor friend was starting to diagnose the source of Brad's stress attack as Molly related. Ken purposely stayed away from any topic that would stress Brad on the way home. He helped walk Brad into the house and moved him to the family room couch. He was surprised that Molly wasn't there for her husband. Brad didn't mind that he had a few hours alone before facing his wife. He did write down some items he wanted to convey to her. He would get into the real meat of the problem in a few days. He just wanted to rest first, not jump into the flaming dumpster that he knew was coming. When Molly did arrive, she dropped her groceries and ran toward Brad. The wounded look in his eyes and the obvious pain in his face stopped her like a fast-running dog hitting the end of his long leash. Brad, I'm sorry. Shut up. I don't want any talk about what you were discussing with Carrie. I need to rest, clear my head and calm down. But Brad, shut up. Didn't I make myself clear to you, or are you trying to kill me? No, Brad. I'm just so happy you are back in our home. I want a long life together with you. I couldn't live without you. If you love me so much, please get me a glass of water. I also need to get this awful hospital food out of my gut. Can you please make me dinner since it's 6 p.m.? It was a very quiet evening as Molly walked a tightrope to keep her apparent infidelity out of any conversation with her obviously upset husband. After 2 hours watching two NFL teams playing uninspired football, he went to bed. For the first time he could remember, he went to bed without kissing Molly goodnight. He went into the master bedroom and shut off any alarms, thinking he could get some sleep that way. Sometime later, he felt his wife slip into bed, nude. She pushed her luscious breasts against his back and wrapped her arm around him. Though it was all he said to make her remove any contact with his skin. It was hard enough for him to get to sleep without having the bed jiggle as she silently sobbed. He thought, if she doesn't like the new arrangement, she can go to the guest room. It was 2 days later that he said, let's talk after breakfast. Are you okay with that? After cleaning up their heart-friendly meal, she sat at the edge of the kitchen table, waiting for the worst conversation of her life. Brad wordlessly walked into the room, sat down across the table from her, and dropped a tablet and pen on the table. Molly, I want you to tell me what is going on, in your own words, in regards to what I heard from your phone call with Carrie. I only heard one side, and it appears you have been cheating on me for some time. Now I want the whole story, from beginning to end. Do you understand what I want to hear? A mumbled yes was so quiet he could barely hear her. Something else, Molly. We're on a cliff over a huge abyss. Our marriage could be mended or destroyed on what you tell me. To me, truth is as important as fidelity. Don't try to lie or omit important points thinking you are saving me or protecting me. If I find out you're lying or hiding facts about your conduct, I'll start divorce proceedings immediately. Understand? Yes. Now, I'm going to let you tell me what has happened and I won't interrupt you. This is your one and only time to lay things out to determine where we go from here. This tablet is so I can write down my questions for you after you've finished. Now it's your turn to talk. Brad, I'm so sorry you had to hear part of my conversation with Carrie. It's understandable for your reaction. What makes it worse is that it happened while you were doing so well. He thought this is a lie based on what she said earlier to Carrie. It sounds like a suck-up to recover from your heart attack. Thank you for not throwing my bum to the street, but letting me explain my position. This is why I love you so much. My story starts 3 years ago after playing a lot of tennis. I was suffering with pulled muscles and strained ligaments. I was sitting on a sideline almost crying from my pain and inability to play well when a man about 10 years younger than me asked if I was okay. I explained my problem and he told me he was a physical therapist and maybe he could help me. At first, I thought he was a jerk and just wanted to rub my peachy legs. He presented his business card and told me we could go to the first aid tent and he could work on me with the EMT's presence. Molly continued, after about a half hour my back was 100 times better and I could finish the tournament. He has an office south of Tampa and I have gone to him a number of times since then to keep my back from going out on me. We never had anything close to sex, it was always doctor-patient professional relationship. I did enjoy his company, but I never even kissed or hugged him. That all changed after your heart attack, Brad. I was a mess mentally and physically as you were so close to death. I didn't know what I would do without you. We have always had a physically challenging sexual relationship. I've never had such great sex in my entire life. Here we are in our 50s and I imagine we are still on our honeymoon. You've built a certain expectation of outstanding sex for me each week. Now that's on hold as you recover. During a PT session he remarked at how tight all my muscles were and they needed attention. I told him about your condition and how much I miss making love with you. He stepped away from me, opened a drawer, then showed me a booklet titled Sex and Physical Therapy. He said my problem wasn't all that unusual, especially with couples that were sexually active. He told me to take the book home, review it and come back to the office if I wanted to pursue this form of sexual release. The book started with stages of activities, just holding and hugging was first. Light kissing progressed to petting and nude touching by both parties. Having the physical therapist bring the client to climax was the chapter that really caught my eye. You've always teased me about my assistant husband and this was along the same lines. The next several chapters discuss PT-patient intercourse. I had no interest in that so I didn't even read them. At my next appointment I requested that he use his skilled hands to bring me off. He agreed, but it wasn't to be a slam bam thank you ma'am event. We spent an hour with the light slow, soft music, hugging and kissing before anything sexual happened. His knowledge of the female body rewarded me with numerous huge screaming ahs. Afterwards, I was just a puddle as we laid together. napping and holding each other like long-lost lovers. This activity started several months ago while you were still in the hospital. I know you don't want to hear this, Brad, but you said you wanted to know everything. Well, this sounds like the most erotic thing I have ever done. It wasn't. I cried all the way to my car. I didn't love him. He was a guy with a talent. I cried because I wanted you to be the one getting me like that, like you used to do. Over the next few weeks, we graduated to actual intercourse. He was not as big, as skilled or as loving as you, and I told him so. He said this wasn't a competition for my kitty, it was keeping my libido simulated, so I could go back to you with my V tuned up like a Ferrari, ready for my main driver to rock my world. He knew I was only going to him until you were well enough to screw me to the moon again. He said he'd happily release me to go back to loving you. He was just keeping my kitty warm until you returned. It was just work with another patient. In fact, he had me sign a sheet each time stating I had a treatment on that date. That's what he called it. A treatment. Brad, this was to just be temporary until you were well. I didn't want my sexual mojo to leave me, as I want you and only you to be in my kitty. I don't want to be one of those middle-aged wives who no longer wants sex with her man. I want to keep rockin' and rollin' with you, babe. I ask for your forgiveness and will answer any questions for you. Brad had a list of items prepared already, but now he had an additional million or two. First off, Molly, who is this guy? I don't really see a need to give you his name, as all this shame is on me rather than him. Okay, Molly, I guess we're done here. I have just enough time to get to the lawyer's office and start the paperwork. As he stood to leave, she jumped up and pleaded, it's Eric Adams in Bradenton, Florida. Thank you, Molly, but I don't intend on arguing every item with you. If you do, then I'll leave. Did he wear rubber when he ducked you? Brad, you know I don't like to hear those kinds of words. And I don't like to hear that you've been ducking some asshole either. So, answer the question. She hung her head and said no, because he said he was safe, as he was very cognizant about total body cleanliness. Did you give him head, and if so, did you swallow his vile cum? A very meek yes, and yes was her answer. Did he duck your peach? After a big sigh she said, Eric said that there are numerous nerve endings in the anus, and he wanted to make sure those nerves were occasionally stimulated. Sounds stupid now, doesn't it? Sheedy plus stupid, was his reply. If I was able to have sex with you in the future but not to your satisfaction, were you going to continue to have treatments by your duck buddy? I considered that, but hadn't made up my mind. It was a possibility, I suppose. I didn't do any planning other than to stop this when we could have sex again. Molly, you mentioned that you wanted to be kept tuned up sexually like a Ferrari. Did it occur that your Ferrari might be shoved out of a nice garage and left in a dark alley if you kept ducking him? No, because no one knew what I was doing. We took lots of precautions. I wanted to be able to respond to you like I did last year, and without this mess I made. How many people know you have been cuckolding me? There was no cuckolding. I always respected you and looked forward to your return to our bed. That's bullshit. When a married woman is ducking someone other than her husband, you are committing the most hurtful part of disrespect ever to the husband. Cuckolding is a simple word that's the most horrible thing you can do to your husband. No real man would ever publicly accept that name tag willingly, as it makes him appear less than a man. Now, how many people know about this ducking treatment that cuckolded me? Just me and Eric. Then what were you talking about with Carrie? Time for another lie to be caught. Oh yes. Carrie and I discussed it at length prior to me entering that more intimate level treatment. She thought it was a good idea and you wouldn't have a problem with it. She reminded me that I am the master of my body. I should be able to make all the decisions regarding what I do with this body. She encouraged the decision I made. She called me later and told me her brothers also thought it would work out well for both of us in the long run. So, the cuckolding cheering squad now has grown from just you and Eric to our 3 kids. That's 5. Did Jonathan and Carrie tell their spouses? Probably. That expands now to 7. Molly could only shrug at his comment. She asked, can I give you an analogy of our situation that I read in the booklet? It's a story about an NFL football player. He'd been the best running back the team had until he was injured, not season ending, but will miss 4 games. The number 2 player comes in and plays well, but when the number 1 is ready, he takes over for number 2. Number 1 doesn't hate number 2 for filling in for him. It's part of life. I think there are some similarities here. Interesting story. The difference is that the NFL contract with both players allows for substitutions for both injury and performance. The team can also cut either player at any time for any reason. Our contract clearly states there will be no substitutions for any reason at any time. That's about all I have for questions today. You can't believe how tired I am. Maybe it's just total disappointment with how my life is being destroyed. This isn't over, we need to talk some more. I'm just not strong enough to delve into this enough to make any sense of the future. At this, Molly rushed to him, crying and saying, I'm so sorry this is happening to you. I promise to make things right with you. I love you so much. To emphasize her point, she threw her arms around his neck and tried to kiss him. Get your falcum slobbering lips away from me. You need to get an STD test before you get within 6 feet of me again. The sooner the better. Oh Brad, I can't do that. I know all the nurses at the health center. I'd be humiliated if I went in and asked to be tested. How humiliating would that be? You mean more humiliating than you ducking some asshole and telling your kids about my inadequacies? Yeah, I feel really sorry for you and your reputation. Sorrier than you feel about my humiliation. I need some fresh air. It stinks here. I'm going outside, so leave me alone, Molly. While Brad walked into the backyard, Molly sobbed at the table. Since it was a warm fall morning, Brad took advantage of the hammock in the shade for a much-needed nap. He'd learned a lot in the talk with Molly, but he wasn't happy with the information he received. Then he wondered, what didn't he know? Yeah. Well, the nap was not refreshing. It was better than discussing how Molly spent her free time. He rolled out of the hammock and headed into the house to get a drink of water. He preferred a good lager beer in the afternoon, but that was out of the question. While on his way to the bathroom, he didn't know that Molly had just finished her shower and was drying off. She was standing, nude, in the middle of the bathroom, vigorously rubbing her hair dry. Her towel covered her face, and she didn't see Brad enter the room. Brad came to an abrupt stop as he saw his wife, nude for the first time in several weeks. He knew that this was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, let alone loved. He couldn't help smiling at such a wonderful body. Molly had just moved the towel from her face and saw a smiling Brad. Their eyes met and lingered on each other. That was until Brad saw it. He gasped as he concentrated his eyesight. There they were. Love bites on her tits and inside her thighs. What the duck? Molly's panic attack erupted as he stared at the love marks given her by Eric in the passion of the moment. Then Brad noticed her shaved kitty. He couldn't help saying, I see your duckity wore all the hair off you, Count. He must really work you over. She firmly stated, I hate that derogatory term. And I hate that some sleazeball is ducking you, Count. Shooting his disease come into your mouth, peach and Count. Brad, I can explain. That seems to be the first sentence all cheaters learn to say when they are caught. Molly, he's marking you. He's sending messages to me that you and your kitty are his and not mine. You are now his cum slot first and I am in second place. How could you do this to me? How? And why? Brad, don't you understand? It's because of you. For years you have given me bone-shaking ass several times a week. I'm like a thoroughbred racehorse that has to keep running. The only reason I had sex with Eric was because I couldn't have sex with you. Eric knows that. We are not lovers. He is just keeping me at a high state of sexual arousal, so I can be the wife you are used to. I'm doing this for you, us, so we can go back to what we had before. Every day I look at you, I want to throw you to the floor and jump on you. I need your pens and my kitty, but I can't do that because it would stop your heart. I want you to live with me for the next 50 years. To do that I have to do the hardest thing I have ever done. Deny myself of sex with you. Sex with Eric means nothing to me, but exercise, like you go to the driving range to grow your swing. Brad stayed quiet, preferring to listen for any nuggets he needed to understand why his loving wife had been betraying him. He didn't feel like arguing. He didn't have the strength or desire to stand and shout at each other. Both the heart that beat in his chest and the heart of his soul had suffered trauma the past couple of days, and he needed to rest. At a place to think without a hurricane of drama. I'm going to relax in the bedroom for a while. Leave me alone. He didn't get to relax very long as his phone informed him of an incoming call from his daughter. Hello, Dad. I'm glad you didn't have to stay so long in the hospital. Was it just a small flare-up in your heart? No, honey, much worse than that. I found out my wife has been cheating on me. Something that surprised and infuriated me. So much so I had an anxiety attack. I'm at a crossroads as to what to do. Oh Dad, no need for worry, just forget about it and move on. Mom loves you, and the sex with her therapist is meaningless. She was a total mess while you were in the hospital. She needed a release or she would have had a heart attack. Didn't you notice how less stressed out she was as she took care of you for the last 4 months? It was the best thing for her and for you to have her have that ability to have that sexual release. My girlfriends and I discussed this and agreed wholeheartedly that she did the right thing for both her and you. The most important thing is that she is nursing you back to health, and you love each other even more than before. She doesn't complain about your heart attack, so you shouldn't complain about her need for her sex treatment. Besides, it's her body, she can do with it whatever she wants. We thought it was almost like a polyamory relationship. Everything but the spouse's approval. Mom and Eric had an honest relationship, they knew what each one wanted and needed from the other. There was an endpoint when you were back to full strength with Mom. They had rules. No dates, no dinners, no socializing, no other people involved, and never say I love you. Eric was only there to fill part of the relationship that was empty in Mom's life. She needed that part to continue to be a full and complete woman. You were never pushed out of the way. You just weren't ready to go. As soon as you're ready, then Eric will leave, just like they planned it. All with no harm to your relationship. Carrie, I appreciate your friend's sage advice of just get over it. After 6 university semesters of being a psych major and still no degree, you really are something. What makes you and your friends think you're qualified to give advice to a 51-year-old heart attack victim with a cheating wife on adjusting to the 2 most devastating events in a man's life? What you're saying to me is nothing more than word vomit. With that, Brad didn't feel like talking to his daughter any longer. Maybe they can talk again in a week or 2. Then he hung up the phone. With his nap interrupted, he called his son Jonathan to ask some questions about work. Something he wasn't allowed to do with Molly around. At the end of the discussion, he asked his eldest son, "Did you know that your mother started having sex with her physical therapist after my heart attack?" "No, this was the first I've heard about it. I knew she was visiting a therapist regularly, but I didn't know anything about the sex they were having." "When did this start and how are you going to end it? Who is this asshole anyway? Didn't you know about it, Dad?" "No, I just stumbled onto it by accident as your mother and Carrie were talking." "Your mother said Carrie told you and Matthew about this, and you were okay with it?" "Absolutely no truth in that whatsoever," Jonathan almost shouted. "I would have remembered that conversation and handed my sister her bum if she revealed that shit was going on. I know she hangs out with some sluts that are into ducking around. I don't know what her husband Tim thinks about that, but I think he and I need to talk." "I'm sorry to hear that, Dad. That has to be a terrible shock. Please let me know what you need, and I will move heaven and earth to help you out, whatever it is." "Thanks, son. I appreciate it. Have you talked to Matthew lately? Does he know anything about this?" "We talked last night about you being in the hospital, but nothing like this travesty came out. We just thought it was a relapse. No one told us anything different. Would you please call your brother and update him? There's only so much energy that I have left today to talk any more about this shitstorm. Don't let on to Carrie or your mother that you know the real reason for the last hospital stay. I want to see what other lies come out and from whom." Jonathan responded, "I know this is difficult for you, but you must shut down your anger and relax. Let what happens happen. You have always been the quick decision guy, but you need to change your style. Slack off, take your time to make a rational decision, not a quick decision. Keep your heart healthy. Okay?" Both men were disappointed in what had happened and promised to remain in touch. There was no way he was going to be calm enough to finish a nap now, so he went into the family room. There he found a note saying, "Going to take the STD test. I don't want to do this, but I'll do anything you ask for if you let me stay married to you. Much love, Molly." We have reached the end of today's story, my dear listeners. If you liked today's video, please drop a like and subscribe to the channel before you leave. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.